This is CBC Edmonton News.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Lindsay Warner. After a disappointing start to the season, the Edmonton Elks have fired general manager and head coach Chris Jones.
You know, it's unfortunate, but when you're the head coach, the blame is put on you when things don't go well, and when things do, you try to give all of that to everybody else. You try to disperse it out, but it's definitely, a tough day. I think we're all in shock right now, but at the end of the day, we got to lace our boots up and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I know Chris has worked tremendously hard to bring this franchise around, but and when you're on 5, there's got to be some consequences.
Jones was hired by the Elks in December of 2021. Previously, he served as a head coach for the team from 2014 to 2015, leading the Elks to a Grey Cup championship in 2015. Quarterbacks coach Jarius Jackson will become the interim head coach, while Geroy Simon will become the interim general manager. Jones' firing comes after a 0-5 start to the season and an 8-33 club record with Jones in charge. The team next plays on Friday against the Red Blacks. The truck driver who caused the deadly Humboldt Broncos bus crash has applied to have his permanent resident status returned. Jaskrit Singh Sidhu had that status revoked in May after he was ordered to be deported. Sidhu moved to Canada from India in 2014. His lawyer says Sidhu has applied to regain permanent resident status on humanitarian grounds. He and his wife have a 1-year-old with severe heart and lung complications, which his lawyer says would make living in India difficult. It will likely take several months before Sidhu's lawyer hears anything about the application, and it could take up to 2 years to process. Sidhu pleaded guilty to dangerous driving offenses as a result of the 2018 bus crash. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but was granted full parole last year. Saturday's assassination attempt on Donald Trump has politicians urging each other to tone down political rhetoric. And when it comes to political violence, Canada is not immune. The CBC's Ashley Burke takes this look at past incidents and current warnings about what might be on the horizon.
Take a look at what happened.
Canada hasn't recently seen anything like this. The assassination attempt of former U.S. President Donald Trump. But this country has seen serious incidents and threats.
It's just a sad state of affairs in democracies around the world. Leaders have to be worried about leadership.
A decade ago, a gunman stormed Parliament Hill. The violence only ended after a shootout that killed the gunman who had already killed reservist Corporal Nathan Cirillo, standing guard at the National War Memorial. Just 2 years earlier, there was an assassination attempt against Quebec Premier-elect Pauline Marois. In 2020, a military reservist rammed his truck into the gates of Rideau Hall, then headed towards the Prime Minister's house with loaded guns. His goal, to arrest Justin Trudeau. Since then, the Sergeant of Arms has warned harassment against MPs is up almost 800%.
That's a significant increase of threats and threat behavior.
There's certainly been an increase, though, in threats and harassment for elected officials.
In an unprecedented move, the Prime Minister was seen wearing a bulletproof vest at a campaign rally in 2019. Some MPs and party leaders have upped their security too.
I am confident that the RCMP will do what's necessary to protect elected leaders in Canada.
The public safety minister says so far there's no link between what happened to Trump in the U.S. and Canada. But the RCMP said it's talking to its U.S. counterpart to adapt its protective measures.
If you want to change the government, you participate in an election and you go to vote. You don't engage in acts of political violence. That's what's so disturbing about what we saw with former President Trump.
Now politicians say it's time to tone down the political rhetoric.
And I think we have to be very mindful that we can have a disagreement in politics, but we have to stick to the issues.
But it should not be that we treat political opponents as enemies. It shouldn't be that we've got violence being inflamed and tensions being inflamed to get to the point of violence or harassment.
The RCMP's commissioner has already raised concerns about threats against elected officials and wants the government to create a new law to make it easier for police to lay charges. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
We heard a bit from Alberta's premier in that item, but Danielle Smith had a lot more to say about the heated political rhetoric on both sides of the border.
Have you not looked at the headlines about how Pierre Poilievre is described as dangerous? How the leader of the opposition in Alberta has described me as dangerous? When you start using that kind of rhetoric, that ends up creating an elevated risk for all of us. And I think we have to be very mindful that we can have a disagreement in politics, but we have to stick to the issues.
Smith has also faced criticism for the way she describes her political opponents. Earlier this year, she told right-wing commentator Tucker Carlson he should put Canadian Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault in the crosshairs. Well, a Calgary political scientist points out the loaded language is coming from all sides of the political spectrum in Alberta, and that the public can stop it by not supporting those who spout it.
And for Danielle Smith to characterize this as somehow something that's happening to conservatives more than others, again, stats, studies clearly show that this is happening, or even a casual observation shows that this is happening on all sides. We as consumers can make a difference. We as voters, we as donors can make a difference by refusing to engage in this activity.
Canada's premiers and territorial leaders are meeting in Halifax this week, and today they welcomed some important guests. And while those guests arrived feeling pessimistic, as Olivia Stefanovic reports, they didn't leave that way.
Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston is playing host this week at a big meeting. He's meeting with his provincial and territorial counterparts, but today a meeting with Indigenous leaders who had their own priorities, with little time to share them. Each Indigenous leader only allocated 10 minutes to speak.
Well, it doesn't send a great message, really. Let's be honest. If we're going to have a 10-minute conversation, what can we really talk about in 10 minutes? Not much.
The conversation took place behind closed doors and ended up lasting longer than expected. 3 hours instead of the 2.5 originally scheduled.
Honestly, this is the third Council of the Federation meeting that I've attended, and I think that there was more of an understanding of the direction that we want to take these meetings in the future than there has been in the past 2 years.
National Indigenous leaders say they went into the meeting feeling disrespected, and even though no firm commitments were made, they left with a sense of optimism.
I do feel as though there is openness. Change takes time. It takes relationship building.
We were able to say very frank things and have an open conversation about where we need to go. And now a lot of it is on Doug Ford as the Premier who's hosting Council of Federation next year to work on improving the space.
The Premiers say they're willing to listen and make changes to hear more from Indigenous leaders.
Premiers are going to have a serious conversation with Indigenous leadership about how these meetings take place to make sure that we're evolving and representing as best as possible the leadership across Canada to be able to reach resolution on some of these really challenging issues.
Some of those issues include housing, affordability, and federal-provincial relations, topics expected to dominate the conversations between premiers over the next 2 days. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Halifax.
Alberta plans to relax rules that make energy companies seeking to buy abandoned wells pay outstanding tax bills on the sites. As Travis McEwen reports, the order was issued last year and was a response to concerns from rural municipalities.
Orphan wells seem to be a constant focus between energy companies, municipalities, and the province. Well, as those wells sit, well, they end up accruing taxes that are owed to the municipalities where they sit. Now, to help with that, last year the province brought in a new rule requiring energy companies who want to buy those wells to pay any of the owed taxes. In a letter acquired by the Canadian Press, the Alberta Energy Regulator's staff notified its CEO of unintended circumstances, that it may be scaring off buyers and leaving more unclaimed wells. So the province is changing tact around that tax rule. In a statement, the province's Energy Minister, Brian Jean, estimates a minority of orphan wells would be attractive to industry, but some municipalities aren't on board with the change.
This minister order, as written, was the hope that we'd have taxes paid. And I understand that there's a possibility that some of those assets never would have been out of the system, and therefore taxes wouldn't have been paid. But again, I'll ask the government very quickly to ask the AER to enforce Directive 67 and 88 as it relates to payment of taxes.
Because of how complex the situation of getting wells out of bankrupt corporations is, I'm not sure whether that will benefit the public or make the situation worse. So I'm uncertain until I see the exact details.
In the fall, the province is undergoing consultation to figure out what to do to reclaim oil and gas sites. Travis McEwen, CBC News, Edmonton.
The provincial government is also providing $2 million toward the replacement of a wartime-era bridge in northern Alberta. The municipal district of Lesser Slave River is planning to replace a 79-year-old bridge that crosses the Athabasca River in the hamlet of Smith. It was built by the U.S. Army during the Second World War as part of construction for the highway to Alaska. The new two-lane replacement is expected to cost $75 million, which the MD can't afford, but the province is now providing $2 million in detailed design funding on top of the $1.6 million last year. The funding is one of 86 grants the province approved for transportation projects in small and rural communities. Outreach workers scrambling to keep Edmonton's vulnerable safe during our next heat wave. After the break, we chat with one agency prepared and stepping up to help.
The weather update is brought to you by Groundworks, your local experts for foundation and crawl space repair.
Another beautiful day in the capital city, and these golfers at the Canada Golf Card driving range on Ellerslie Road certainly took advantage of it. Temperatures are set to rise higher this week, but before that happens, how about another round of golf? If you're hitting the link, send your pictures or videos to us to be featured right here. So these are temperatures right now across the province. Lloyd, you're not keeping up with us at 19 degrees. You're definitely not quite as warm, but Jasper, you can see the heat wave is hitting the western part of the province. Now, this is going to be something we need to hunker down for. It's a prolonged heat wave that we're going to be experiencing. Over the next 24 to 48 hours, we could see some precipitation. Tomorrow, in fact, a risk of a thunderstorm in the afternoon, but after that, that chance goes to practically zero as temperatures just rise. That cloud is going to burn off and temperatures are going to be right around the 30-degree mark and not giving us much relief. So definitely watch out for the vulnerable, watch out for your pets, and definitely time to drink lots of water, turn on the air conditioning, right? The Alberta Institute for Wildlife Conservation is at capacity for the number of deer it is caring for, fawns in particular. And the Institute says about half the animals they've taken in were not even in need of rescue. Dave Gilson has the details.
In an outdoor enclosure at the Institute near Madden, staff are currently caring for 8 deer fawns. They say 4 were accidentally removed from the wild. They add a fawn lying all alone is normal and that deer often leave their young alone for long periods, only making short visits to nurse them. Acting Executive Director Katrina Terrell says they're recommending people leave young deer alone unless they're obviously ill or injured.
So if you're ever not sure about something, please call us. We love to talk to you. We want to make sure that only the animals that really need to come in are the ones being brought in by people. We know that people are doing this out of the best intentions, They really want to help the wildlife, and I love that they do, but we want to make sure that we're helping the wildlife in the most appropriate way, whether that is simply leaving them where they are or actually having someone come out and rescue the animal.
They expect to release the deer fawns by September. Terrell says they see this happen with other wildlife as well. She recommends people call their wildlife hotline for information and advice. She says they're currently caring for more than 200 patients and adds they continue to welcome public donations. Dave Gilson, CBC News, near Madden.
Leave Bambi with his mommy, people. He's cute, but don't pick him up unless you get advice to. Now, the greatest outdoor show on earth wrapped up yesterday, but there's a milestone keeping Calgarians yahooing. So the Stampede broke its attendance record with nearly 1.5 million visits. That number topped the previous record set in 2012 by a few 100,000. Several single-day attendance records were also broken, including an opening day record. Well, I'm back with your next newscast at 11 tonight. We'll see you then. But first, how about the second annual Alberta Wife Carrying Championship that was held Saturday in Lac La Biche? As the name suggests, carriers must hoist their partners onto their backs and race through without dropping them. And then you can win 5 times their weight in cash or their weight in beer. Have a good night. See you at 11.